let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Ruby Clyde Roberts is here. Hello, Ruby.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, wow, I'm very loud.
Could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Quietly, I'll tell you quietly. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We're here at the OGTC, and I'm very pleased to say that this is our official launch. So we're going to talk about innovation. So you get to be first-hand innovators with the new project about to launch today. All the press release went out. So you get to find out something new and exciting that maybe nobody else knows about yet. I'm a psychologist. I've been working with Professor Rona Flynn. Rona, wave to everybody. And I've been studying and working in Aberdeen for the last 10 years, and I'm an organisational psychologist.
Thank you so much for being here today. Would
My
you
pleasure.
like to tell us a bit about what you're going to present?
I could say no, but sure. So the OGTC are innovators, right? And one of the key barriers that have been identified in a number of ways is this human factor. And we're all pretty familiar with the human factor as a term. No, yes, nodding it helps. And so what we're wanting to do is apply this idea of human factors, which has been very well applied in safety, to a new problem or a new challenge, which is technology adoption. And this is what we're really going to talk about and introduce you to in the next very quick 20 minutes.
Perfect. Luca, would you mind to join us as well? Luca is our Innovation Network Director. Could you tell us about the relevance of this topic for oil and gas?
I think that Ruby just covered it perfectly well. We're, as a technology center, what we do, we co-invest and we try to accelerate the development and the deployment of new technology in the industry to make the oil and gas industry in the UK more efficient. And so that's the technology element. But you can't ignore that somehow the resistance to technology adoption and deployment is often not technical and human. So I'm very pleased to be one of the supervisors of this project, one of the sponsors of this project that we're doing with RGU, to look into the human resistance or human factors, the psychologist element that can prevent the new technology to be deployed. And of course, being practical, we aim that this project not only will uncover the reason why that happened, but also help us then put in place some tools. And so, okay, so what do we do then? So how can we anticipate this resistance and design the technology maybe in a different way, or plan the adoption or plan the development in a different way? So very pleased that this project kicked off finally, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Ruby about how we're going to go ahead with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruby. And thank you, Ruby, sorry.
You
thank
can be Ruby
Luca.
if you like.
And thank you, Ruby, for being here. If you're ready,
yeah.
20 minutes will start now.
Oh, I feel like I'm on countdown. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you coming out for your Friday lunch. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a whirlwind 20 minutes. And what I want to do is I want to introduce you to the project. I'm going to tell you a little bit of background, why we're doing it, what we're doing, and what we're hoping to get out of it. And then we're going to have a little fun bit where we do a little exercise. Don't worry, it's nothing awful. So the aim really is to smooth that road to technological adoption. What can we learn from other industries and how can we move forward? Just to point out that it's also been supervised very well by David, but also by Luca. We've got my senior leadership team keeping me on track with Rona. So good start in any kind of project is to make sure that we're on the same page. Now this might seem self-explanatory, but I want to make sure that we're on the same page before I keep going. So I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. I love to argue about definitions and semantics and what do you mean by this? But we're practical people here at the OGTC. So a good definition to start with in terms of innovation is what do I mean? So it's an idea, it's a product, it's a program, etc. And it has to be new to that adopting unit. Is that fair? Is that a fair idea of what innovation might cover? It's an active process. Innovation does not occur in a vacuum. We are all a part of that and we interact and have an influence on it. We can have radical, so radical is the introduction of televisions or cars, things that we now no longer can imagine not living with, but at one point were very innovative. Then we have our incremental, our iPhones, etc. And the reason I highlight this idea of radical innovation is because this is what we're really looking at, because this is the really exciting, sexy stuff, the stuff that we really want to find out about and that could change oil and gas. But from my point of view, these are the kind of things can be influenced at a psychological level at those radical technological innovations. One other point that I wanted to point out that's really important for innovation is diffusion. So how do we learn and communicate about it? And it's wonderful that you've all came out to this event, because this is a perfect example of innovation diffusion, learning, communicating, and sharing. And we have our standard kind of process of we initiate that adoption process, we learn, we develop attitudes, we get experience, all of that fun psychological stuff. And then we have to make a decision. Are we going to go with this innovation? Are we going to allocate resources? Are we not sure? Are we going to have to go back and have a different conversation? And if we are we going to implement it? So we all feel we were roughly kind of the idea of what I'm talking about in innovation? Nodding helps. Nodding is good. Interaction is good. So the reason I have a lovely selection of nice photographs, other than my penchant for photographs, is I really wanted to illustrate that innovation is not a new thing in oil and gas. Not at all. We are innovators. You are all innovators, whether you're aware of it or not. The oil and gas industry is built on innovation. We have a whole selection here of key points in our history in oil and gas where innovation has really pushed us forward. And of the many people I've spoken to, we're at another point where innovation can keep pushing us forward, keep developing that industry. But the elephant in the room being, why do we need innovation, right? Because change is hard and it's very expensive. We have a number of problems, or challenges, if you prefer, that we need to tackle. But if that's true, why aren't we innovating already? Why aren't we moving forward? Well, Silicon Valley or fast follow, fast often failing, we can't do that. We have a whole bunch of challenges that make it a little bit trickier to build up that picture. Build up a kind of resistance to innovation, to change. Now, the one that I particularly pick up is this risk aversion, our unwillingness to change. And these are not my words, these are the words of the Wood Review, pointing out that this is one of our biggest barriers to the future success of the oil and gas industry. And it is at this point where we're talking about our human factor, our person, our individual who is risk averse. So, what are we going to do about it? This is where our project comes in. So, apologize for the funny graphics. I'm not very used to the giant screens, not that innovative myself. But it's a 2-year project hosted by the OGTC and run at the Aberdeen Business School, very smart individuals down there. And now our aim of the project is to identify what these key psychological factors are that get in the way. What are these barriers? What are these human factors, if you will? And if we can understand them from an empirical, evidence-based perspective, we can build best practices. So we can do the next step of, this is very interesting, but so what? What can we do with it? What can you guys take away from this? Now, as it was mentioned earlier, our background is in safety science, safety research. Now, we're all probably quite familiar with the different methods that have been used, and safety culture and speaking up, etc. And it's these types of methods that you can use and utilize to get an understanding of the situation. And we're pretty much going to use that same approach, but to a different challenge, to things like literature reviews, interviews, talking to people like yourselves, doing case studies, all of these kind of interesting methods from my point of view that build up a rich and accurate and interesting a picture of what really is going on. Because if we really understand what's going on, we can then start to build an understanding. And then if we have an understanding, we can do the much more exciting part from your point of view, which is developing these tools. So, any starts? Any good starts to a project is to work out, what's my current situation? You don't want to reinvent the wheel, taken from me. Now, the magic of coming to a lunch event is that you don't have to go through the 50, 60 papers and doing the highlighting and reading the old PhD, so I'm going to do it for you. So there's a couple of things I want to highlight. So when we have a look at the literature, just generally, I'm not even being specific at this point, it's very limited. There's lots of anecdotal evidence, conversations, work groups. There's an appetite, but nothing specific. And what's interesting is that service companies innovate most. The US, unsurprisingly, they dominate innovation, and the UK, less so. When we look at general barriers that people most frequently discuss in terms of innovation, they're all very quite familiar, need for a technical backbone, confusion, etc. But that's not really where our focus is. Our focus is in these much more exciting, kind of messier things to do with psychological factors. Now, those psychological factors are really hints of a tint of a possibility. It's not definitive research that you find when you read the research. It's things like leadership, that message from above, having an adoption culture, same idea as safety culture, but from a slightly different challenge, things to do with risk aversion, all the kind of things you'll find if you read the Wood Review in 2014. And then this kind of cost-cutting leadership attitude. And there's no point in pointing a finger of blame. This is what we're doing. It's our jobs, right? So, has anybody done anything like this before? Do we think so? No? Yes? Do we think anybody's done this before? Okay, well, technically a couple of people have done some interesting work. Nothing specific looking at this psychological aspect. Now, if you are very interested, I'm quite happy to send you papers, but I wanted to bring your attention to one particular study which was of interest. Now, this was looking at an offshore construction project in the North Sea. What they did is, at the very beginning of the project, they took a partnering approach, so a collaborative approach for innovation. Now, this turned out to be very successful, but not successful in maybe the way you think. You know, I'm a psychologist, it's fuzzy, oh, we sit on couches and we chat about our feelings. No. It was successful in a very hard and fast way. So taking this innovative collaborative approach meant that they cut incident rates by half. That's pretty good. They were ahead of schedule by 6 months. And as a consequence, they were £45 million under budget, giving a very nice bonus. So when I stand here and I talk about human factors in psychology, I don't mean it in a fluffy way. I mean that doing it well and understanding it can have a very nice financial reward at the end. So, if this is this human factor part, this is the really crucial part. We're at the beginning of the project, but I want to give you a flavor, an understanding of what's been done in other industries. What can we learn from other industries? So, I want to do something slightly different. So we've got neat rows. So for 5 minutes, I want you to be an entrepreneur. I want you to have a tech company. There's 2 of you in the front. You know, these are your company. These are your workmates, right? And you're really good. You're very good at your jobs. We're here at the OGTC. We have all of the resources and knowledge available to us. And what we want to do is we're down here. And we want to get past all of these problems and we want to take our journey to adoption, right? But there's lots of things that are in our way. Now, a couple of things that might be obvious because we're very good at our jobs and we're very well prepared is this idea that we've prepared for market. Is the market ready for our piece of technology? Are we really going to change the industry? I think we are. I think we're good at this. Now, if we're very well researched, you all look very intelligent, so I'm sure that we are very well researched, we know that if we're going to go and take our new innovative product out, we have to pitch to people, and its people are part of those organizations. So we've probably done a little bit of research about the innovativeness of those individuals and the organizations that they work for. Maybe? Are they open to change? Do they have technical knowledge about whatever it is that we're pitching to them? Because this is going to be a big barrier, a big first barrier. If you're a TechX pioneer and you're going out and you want to find out more about whatever it is, you need to talk to people, and it's understanding that innovativeness. It's a big first step. But people don't work and live in a vacuum. They're part of an organization. And so maybe we're going to have a think a little bit further about what's that culture like. And by culture, I mean, what are the norms? What are the expectations? If you have a conversation in a meeting and you're talking about maybe getting some new piece of equipment which, you know, could save time and money, what's the automatic response? Is the response positive? Is it negative? Is it the sentence of, I really like your idea, pause, but... It's all of these little kind of subtle messages that you can start to pick out about the culture. There may be agendas, there may be internal loyalties. We're all very smart, but it could be that our piece of technological innovation that we're taking out to market, actually the company has something very similar internally. But really what we're getting at is risk. Our risk aversion, our uncertainty. Innovation, I will not lie, is an uncertain game. We do not quite know what's going to come out at the end of it. And a big part of that risk aversion is trust. So you don't really need trust if there's no element of risk. It's when we start to think that something's risky that we need trust. And if we're thinking about trust, you got it. We're talking about people again. We're talking about their motivations. We're talking about their beliefs, their attitudes. So what are the individuals of yourselves, of your colleagues, of people that you're working with at the organization? What are their motivations? What are their beliefs? And I don't mean beliefs generally. I mean, what are the beliefs around technology, about change, about innovation, about the oil and gas industry? Because all of these beliefs build up a picture and a feeling and an attitude. And it's this relationship between our attitude and our trust and our risk that are so closely knit together. So once you can start to understand what those attitudes are, we can go a long way to start to understand more about this relationship between trust and risk. And then a big part of where you get your attitudes from is your previous experience, right? So if you've had a great experience with your new PC, when the IT department calls you, I know, the IT department calls you and says, we're going to do some upgrades, do you go, yay, woo, woo? No, you don't. You go, oh, me. Because your previous experience is that it's slow, it makes your life harder, and it takes up your time. And so this applies just the same to technological innovation. And all of these previous experiences build up to give a sense of expectation. What do you expect your entrepreneur or your tech company to bring to the table? And if we're not careful, this builds up a huge resistance, builds up a huge barrier. So we are still stuck back down here. We maybe have gotten over the first mountain, but we are not at the other side. Now, what is it that we think that links all of these little mountains together? Anybody take a guess? It's the people, right? If you can understand the psychological point of view at each of these steps, you can go a long way to getting down here. And as part of my little cell, that's where our project neatly fits in. Because it's not sufficient for us to just take what we've learned from other industry and copy and paste it across. As nice and easy as that would be, for things to be effective, they need to be empirical. They need to be evidence-based. And we know that this can be a successful method. All of the work that we take for granted now in terms of safety culture and patient safety, all of this stuff, that was based on research. So, my final 5 minutes. I want to give you some final thoughts. Innovation is crucial. Okay, I'm going to try and make eye contact with absolutely everybody to make sure that this message is strong enough as possible. And I'm doing that because clearly my message is not strong enough, because otherwise I wouldn't have to be doing this project. And what I'd like you to do is have a think. Do you think that innovation is important? If you do, I want you to stick your hand up. And it's okay if you don't, because I won't persecute you. That's awesome. You have all become my champions. Is that okay? Do you mind being my champions? Not me personally. But what I want you to do at the end of this afternoon, you go back to work, you go back to work on Monday. I want you to have a think about a couple of things. I want you to think about your own innovativeness. Not everybody is innovative. I will tell you a secret. I am not an innovative person. I don't bring an iPad to a meeting. I take notes. I swear at my PC constantly. So I'm just going to be a tricky innovator. But in my own domain, I'm very innovative. And so I want you to think about this honestly to yourselves, because I need champions that are innovative. And once you've done that, I want you to have a think about your own attitudes. Where are you getting your information about innovation from? Is it from your friends, your family, your colleagues? And then what are you doing with that? How are you building up your attitudes? And this isn't a blame game. If you honestly think it's shit, that's okay. I just need you to be a little bit honest. But you don't exist in a vacuum. You work in organizations, right? So what I'd also like to do, have a look when you go back to work. Let's do it on Monday, because life's easier on Mondays. And I want you to have a think about what messages are you getting? Or what messages are you sending out about innovation? Is innovation a positive thing, a neutral thing, a negative thing? Where are we going with this? What messages are other people sending? What are the norms, the expectations? And as a consequence, how is that affecting everybody else's innovative behavior? Is that fair? Do you mind doing that? I'm going to make you do it anyway. Because once you have a product champion, we can go so much further with this. So, You're all going to be my nice champions. And in return, there are a couple of things that we can cover in terms of how to reduce barriers, and a couple of things that you can do in terms of reducing those barriers we can learn from consumer psychology. And they're often basic things like mental visualization, using product demos, changing status quo, etc. And from an organizational point of view, there are also quite a few ways to have a look at your own culture, which maybe are less obviously related to human factors or psychology. But they still are. So have a think about your management strategies. What messages are they sending? Where are the priorities lying? What are the procedures like? Do your procedures hinder innovation? What messages do they send? What is the priority in the culture? What technical backbone do you have? It's very difficult to pitch successfully your new piece of product, right? Because remember, we're all technology entrepreneurs. If your buyer in front of you is not a very well-informed buyer, it's very tricky to make an assessment on what's a good choice and how risky it is and how much trust you need to put into that if you don't know very much about it. So my final plea, with my exact 1 minute left, is I would like to ask you to get involved. And I appreciate that your lives are very busy and your schedules are crazy. But if you can, this is a 2-year project. There will be plenty of opportunities to get involved. Please take a photo. This is my email. I don't quite know why RGU give me such a funny email, but find me on LinkedIn, get in touch, and I would love to hear about your own experiences in innovation. And that is obviously confidential. I'm not going to blab. But I want to hear about the good experiences where you've maybe done some internal innovation. Not all innovation is from a new tech startup. Sometimes this can be putting in a new piece of managerial process. It might be doing something internal. It might be to do with recording incidents, whatever. I also really, really want to hear about where it went wrong. I want to know all about your experience of where life was difficult. We'll also be doing some exciting Dragon's Den type stuff. You're going to want to come to that. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to open the floor to questions.
That's brilliant, Ruby. Thank you very much for presenting this project to us. Now, we're very interested in hearing any thoughts or any questions that you may have. We'll move to the Q&A section, and Lauren has a microphone that she will bring to you. So if you would raise your arms when you have a question for Ruby, and we'll bring you a microphone so everyone can hear you clearly. Do you have questions?
I won't bite.
In the front.
That was very interesting. The question I have was, I was really surprised to hear that the USA were leaders in innovation in oil and gas, because we've often been talking about how the northeast of Scotland is all about innovation for oil and gas. So I was really surprised that you found literature suggesting that. So I was just curious to where that came from.
Okay, sure. So I wonder if I can scoot back. My lovely innovative slides. So where this comes from was a large survey. It was run by Robert Perrones, and it was utilizing the SPE membership. And it was a way of getting a lay of the land, not specifically asking in detailed questioning, but really what they're asking is who's innovating, and they're measuring that by number. I think it was number of patents and the number of new pieces of technology actually deployed. And so it is going to be slightly skewed because a large part of the SPE membership is in the US, right? So it is going to be skewed. Yeah, you ask the Americans who's the best, and the Americans will tell you that the Americans are best. Right? But it's still interesting when you looked at the percentages. So when you took out the variable of size and the country and membership, the US was still really pushing ahead. And there's some argument that it's to do with national culture. It could be to do with the way that innovation is rewarded and the way that they push towards that. It could be a whole bunch of factors. And it could still, in fact, be that it's a big SPE membership. But what was interesting and a little depressing from my point of view was this idea that the UK was less likely to innovate. Because when you look at the UK as a whole, we're very innovative compared to our compadres in Europe in terms of our number of patents and innovations deployed. And this is where I started to get a bit stuck, a little bit down, to be honest, I won't lie. But thank you. I can send you the paper if you'd like. No, nobody wants to read the papers.
Just an observation, really, that was dated 2014 at the start of the downturn.
Certainly.
And I think there's been a major culture shift in the UK, both in terms of development and in terms of willingness to adopt. I'm obviously not putting against what you're doing, because it's absolutely fascinating, but I wonder whether that would actually be different if you asked the question today.
I think that the question, I really hope that the question's answer would be different now, and that we are much more innovative. And this is the slight paradox. I don't know, and I'm quite happy to take everybody else's comments because you're the experts in the room. But from my experience so far, you talk to individuals and you ask them about the programs that they're doing. Incredibly innovative. Incredibly innovative. Despite the difficulties of we're sending people out into the North Sea, incredibly innovative. So I would hope that there would be a difference.
I just want to offer a thought from just my own experience over the last 6 months, and that's about LinkedIn. So if you look at how small businesses use LinkedIn for business-to-business marketing, because it's actually very cheap, and they don't have huge budgets. And then probably if you were to look at, well, how many people in the oil and gas industry actively use LinkedIn? And then the question is, well, are we just sort of slow to adopt some of these sorts of nimble technologies because we don't have to in oil and gas? And then, of course, you've got the problem in innovation. If people don't know about your idea, they're not going to adopt it. So is there something there when you look at actually the ways in which oil and gas employees of oil and gas companies communicate or collaborate may not be the same as some of the smaller people who are trying to innovate?
So from my personal experience, I'm a super fan of LinkedIn. You all can find me on LinkedIn, and my shirt will match. I'm that good at staying on brand. And there are a number of really great resources for LinkedIn in terms of professional oil and gas groups. But there probably is something to do with, I got into LinkedIn not being in oil and gas. I got into LinkedIn being in medicine, in the medical area, where they pushed for this kind of learning and international communication and building up personal networks. So it could be that we're slightly slow, but I'm not sure, because there is still quite a lot of activity online in terms of learning about maybe not technologies and innovation, but certainly learning about each other and what we're up to. So I'm not sure on that front. Perfectly valid point. Definitely worth having a look at.
Thank you. Again, possibly a suggestion, a point for thought, and certainly for research. I would suggest that there is a second, even more pernicious elephant in the room that we can't see. It hasn't been mentioned on your screen that I can't see. It's not in the oil and gas strategy document, the technology strategy document. And it is to do, for me, it's the biggest break, and not just B-R-A-K-E, but B-R-E-A-K on innovation in this country. And that is the British disdain for sales. Right?
Okay.
I have just returned this morning from the launch of the Energy Industries Council report on Survive and Thrive. Right? And in this document, only on page 19 does the word sales appear. It's in the innovation section, and even then, it's only in item number 9. Right? My experience in the industry is that up till the downturn, the prevailing psychology, which still lingers, is that all one needs to sell is a technology and relationships. Now, that was the case. That is no longer the case at all. There's far too much competition globally. Right? Digitization is coming in, right? And innovation is coming in. Right? But we, the British, right, will have a real paranoia about sales management, and indeed specifically sales campaigns. And so my suggestion or my thought to you is, that national psychosis needs to be included in your project as well.
No, thank you for your point. I think that's really valid, and I can do this neat little thing where I go, I've actually looked at this. And there is some work looking at the relationship between national culture. So if we're all familiar with Hofstadter's 5 categories or dimensions of culture, and one of them that's particularly relevant, I think, to this is the idea of uncertainty avoidance. And there is literature looking at culture, the relationship between culture and what we're comfortable with and not comfortable with, and innovation. So I definitely think that's a valid point to consider. Thank you.
Sort of connected to the last question,
okay.
but also connected by the title of your presentation today. The title isn't the title you have there.
Yeah, let's switch back.
The title, the original title was The Adoption of Technology, just to give you some
background.
There we go.
Oh, shoot, gone too far. Yep.
I don't disagree that UK is probably more innovative than the US, certainly from my experiences of working with British and American companies down the years. The issue I've seen is that the adoption of technology in the UKCS is the issue. It's not the innovation. If you look at most energy technology around the world, a lot of it does come from here. I worked for 20 years, big companies and small companies, pushing technology into the marketplace, and generally the British companies will go elsewhere. Now, so the issue you come back to is, because our companies we are a British company, we pushed energy technologies, oil and gas and renewables into multiple markets, and we never come here. Mainly because you can get better traction, faster traction in Australia, in the US, in Latin America, elsewhere. So my question is, sorry, very long.
No, that's okay.
Very long story. So on your empirical bit, on stage 2, did your empirical interviews show up why the adoption of technology is the issue, not innovation? Because I don't think innovation is the issue.
Okay, couple of things. We're 2 months in, so this is our plan. All right, this is our plan. Second thing, valid point. So just to clarify, and anybody can jump in at this point. We think that we're innovative, right? So I come from a university background, spend a lot of time with really smart people who come up with amazing ideas, very smart. So correct me if I'm wrong, is what you're getting at that we're very innovative, but we're not very good at adopting it. So we take our really smart ideas and we go away with them. Is this what we're getting at?
Yeah, but also go back to the last point, we don't sell it in a whole market. We don't sell it in a whole market either because we are pushed down from our large corporations not to invest in high-risk technologies because there's a chance that our contingent budget is not large enough to pay for it, when actually it would probably be cheaper using the new technology than using the old technology. So part of it is the selling, but it's also easier to sell in other markets than it is in the UK market.
Okay. Even that's going to become more difficult because what's happening at the moment is there's massive investment worldwide, particularly in the oil and gas industry, in supply chain management and incoming automated procurement. And I would challenge any company in this room, any company on the UKCS, to show us their figures for how much money they're putting into supply chain management, automated procurement, as opposed to how much they're putting into sales.
So can I ask the room a question in return? So I'm quite willing to take the point that maybe we are very innovative. I'd probably agree. So if our problem is adoption, why? I've got you all in the room, so I might as well ask.
Hello. So my role is actually trying to push some of these new technologies, digitization technologies, within our own business. And actually, the biggest challenge that I see, so we've got the technology, we've adopted it, we've partnered with other companies, we've got the benefits case, we've got a great idea, we're going to sell this, we're going. And it's down to the individuals. So even though that new ways of working are actually mandated by leadership, it's absolutely down to individual and people. Yeah. Because change is hard, and we have a whole range of skill set in our field technicians. And that ranges, and I'm not trying very hard not to be ageist at all here, but there is a range of experience out there. There are people out there who are so uncomfortable with using even what we would consider to be very basic technology that you would use on a smartphone. And quite honestly, that is the biggest challenge we've had. So we're thinking generational. Let's call it generational issues. Let's call it generational. Let's call it experience with and would basic technology. Would it also be trust in technology? Do you think maybe they don't trust, because that's very prevalent in other industries? What, fear of technology or fear of change? So it's fear of change, but also probably a fear of your job security. Is that fear? Yeah.
Yeah, that's not new. I've heard this plenty times. Yeah, and you can understand why. You can understand where they're coming from.
If we're back in the middle of 2014, the fairness to adopt changed right then.
Mm-hmm.
It's better over the last 12 months, but the last 4 years, it's a dream to actually try and pitch to the larger oil companies right now.
So we're back to our individual point of view of how do I change the end user's attitude? Is that fair?
They're the buyers of the tech.
Yeah. Okay.
Also an organisation, where you are in an organisation as well.
Okay.
So it's typically the guys at the very top that see the benefit of buying.
Okay. So we've bought in at the top, but the rationale.
The guys at the bottom, the younger engineers, are why are we not doing this?
Mm-hmm.
There's that tranche in the middle.
Okay, so I've got my innovative leaders who are going, let's do this. And then I've got my folk at the bottom going, this is great. So I'm stuck in the middle. Is this fair? This is something we maybe talked about earlier.
Well, we're not teaching our people to put forward, to construct and put forward arguments.
Okay.
That's the big issue. They're just not doing it. Unless you tell me otherwise, the last research I did in early 2016, not a single one of 16 Scottish STEM universities have a industrial marketing and sales course at undergraduate or postgraduate level.
Okay.
It's just not done.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I've got a couple of questions over here, so we'll just...
So it was just coming back to the adoption piece. We run workshops specifically designed to allow people to socialise potential change and create that buy-in. And I think one of the barriers you were asking about, when people are saying, you're asking what are the barriers? My perception is that lots of companies design the change, think about the change, think about the innovation, and then they almost foist it on the organisation. And they don't give people enough time to, as being sort of say there, a full vertical slice of the organisation to look at it and say, I like it, I don't like it, why are we doing it like this? And almost consult with people in advance. It's presented as de facto sometimes, which is one of the biggest barriers.
So you don't own it. You're just being pushed on it, and so you have no control. Yeah, I would definitely 100% agree.
Hi, I've got maybe a slightly different point. I think one of the barriers to innovation is actually the contracting models that we've been using in oil and gas over the years. And I think that perhaps there's human factors involved in not changing those contracting models because people are used to the way they operate. And I've worked in operators and service companies, large and small, and a lot of the contracts don't reward innovation. They reward cost cutting, but they don't reward innovative behaviour.
So we're getting to a more fundamental underlying thing of what do we reward and what do we punish? Yeah. This is quite a commonly voiced concern, because if you reward cost reduction and you punish innovation, what do you think somebody's going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to look at cost effectiveness.
It's different, yeah.
We are unfortunately running out of time, so we'll leave room for one more comment.
I will be here afterwards.
For discussion.
Am I the lucky one holding the microphone? Really enjoyable presentation. Thank you very much. We've been talking about the need for technology deployment for quite a while because I was born out of the Wood Review, which you reference. I think we can learn a lot from some very positive case studies that I see. So I hear frustration in the room, and of course there's an awful lot more to do, and it's very timely. But I would argue that we are seeing some really brilliant deployments, some really great innovation, and it's accelerating, and the OGTC are helping massively, as are the OGA, many others. And why don't we look at the successful case studies, and what are the ingredients for success? Things like different supply chain models, leadership that deals with the permafrost, things that allow the young innovators to really have a say, very different partnerships. But there's a lot we can learn, and it's happening, actually. So, and I'll be really interested in 2 years to see whether the barriers here are that different to barriers around safety and all the other. I actually don't think they are, and I think actually I would always make a bid for great leadership will solve most of this.
I think the idea of looking at the success stories is much more inspiring than looking at the miserable, sad stories of where it's failed. Though looking both of them is, from my point of view, very interesting, and you can learn a lot. But I agree that there are some fabulous stories out there if you're willing to listen and then see what we can learn. And certainly at that case study point that I mentioned, that is a valuable point in which to learn and listen to those who have been very successful, and what can we then teach everybody else about being successful in that way. Thank you.
We will unfortunately have to finish our Q&A. Thank you very much for your contributions. It will definitely help Ruby with her project and contribute. Now, if you would like to continue the discussions upstairs, we do invite you to stay at our tech lounge. Ruby also showed that she would be interested in hearing to more opinions. And Ruby, at the OGTC, we're very excited to see how this will go and what kind of conclusions you will get to. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in the room as well, so we wish you all the best in this project.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Today.